Welcome to the SADA podcast, where we explore critical issues shaping South Asia's political and social landscape. Today, we turn to a fascinating transformation in Indian democracy. Women voters are no longer just a silent presence at the ballot box, they are emerging as decisive political agents. Consider this. In the 2024 Lok Sabha elections, women's turnout slightly exceeded men's for the second time in history. Yet, despite this surge, women still make up only about 13% of parliament. At the same time, welfare programs, grassroots mobilization, and election commission initiatives have helped close the gender gap. While the 106th constitutional amendment promises one-third reservation for women in legislature, though its implementation may not happen until 2029. So, what does this shift mean for India's democracy? Are women voters exercising independent agency, or are they still constrained by household and party structures? And how do caste, class, and region intersect with gender in shaping political behavior? To unpack these questions, I'm joined by Dr. Chayanika Unial, whose research traces the journey from colonial suffrage negotiations to contemporary debates on representation. Her work offers a unique lens on how formal rights have not always translated into substantive political power. Dr. Unial, welcome to the podcast. It is a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So today's topic, we are talking women as silent voters. I want you to define the silent voter in India and what distinguishes her from a political agent today.
In India, a silent voter is usually a woman who votes in election but doesn't rely have a say in political decisions, and or often her vote basically influenced by family or by community or caste. But and political parties also don't see her as a number, as an individual. Those women is actually considered like as a number only. But things are changing. More of women are, you can say, becoming the political agents, meaning they are having their own choice regarding the votes, candidates, or the parties, and they are having impactful role in local governance. So things are changing, but still, I would say it's not a large scale change. Still, we need to go miles ahead. It's a change, primarily changes, you can say. It's not a big change, but yeah, we can feel the change.
But why do you say that they are silent voters?
Because you see, I'll tell you, women's basically, they consider as a vulnerable persons, like they are always need to follow the guidance given by parents or the husband or the brother or the son. They never considered as an individual person. I'll tell you one incident. Like, I'm working in Delhi University, so
Mhm.
there are also academic political affiliation within the university, teachers body elections. So we have the different parties, bodies, like CPM has one, BJP has one, Congress has one. So one
Everybody.
senior person who told me that we can't consider that particular teacher as a Congress person. So I
Mhm.
asked why. Why is it so? He said his wife in Aam Aadmi Party, and he couldn't even convince his wife. So how can he be the Congress leader? So I said, why her wife, who is teaching in Delhi University, can't have a different political opinion? So still
Absolutely. I mean,
in
this is outrageous. Yeah.
it's still in, you see, it's a Delhi University, the heart of the India and the prime education institution. If the person was were having the peoples were having such kind of thought process in that particular institution, we can imagine what is happening in rural area. So still women are silent voters, they are not upfront leaders. So that's why I'm telling them the silent voters. It's all about the mindset basically. And when I discuss with my students, I just like I teach gender in global history. We discuss beyond the syllabus also many things we discuss regarding the gender, and I find my students, they are very vocal, but they still say that they feel that but they can't express it. Why they can't express it? Because they feel if they will express such kind of ideas or opinion, that could harm their family's reputation or their own reputation. So that's why I'm saying the change are reflecting. We can see the change. Women, young girls who are expressing themselves in the classroom, but still they are not comfortable to express themselves within the society. There is a gap. So we need to fill that gap so women can feel confident and speak their own political opinion or own their own ideas in front of the society without fearing that they could be judged by their opinion.
Right. Just before jumping on to the second question, I want to know that
Yeah.
what kind of role they play in policy making. Is there any recent history that there were any particular policy that are being changed by the women voters only, or there is no examples like that?
I can't see the women voters' influence in changing the policy, but I will share one incident. I'm not only the academician, I always been associated with the Congress party also. I have been the political affiliation with the party. I was the National Student Union vice president, then Youth Congress, and then Mahila Congress. So when I was in Mahila Congress, and Sushmita Dev, she is a Rajya Sabha MP right now with the Mamata Banerjee's party, Trinamool Congress. But earlier she was a Lok Sabha MP from Congress party, and she was Mahila Congress national president. And that time GST bill came. Okay, when GST bill came, the GST was imposed on the sanitary pad also. GST basically considered to for luxury item, and sanitary pad is not a luxury item; it's a need of a woman. And many women in rural area, they still don't not using that sanitary pad. They can't afford it. So imposing a sanitary GST on sanitary pad, that gap will become more bigger than earlier. So that time I remember being a women Congress president and being a parliamentarian, she opposed, and the Mahila Congress also raised its voice against this GST bill. And finally, many NGOs came into that, and finally, government had to remove that GST. So it was a policy change, basically, you can
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
in such condition, you need the women voices who can understand what is favorable for the women, and that men can't understand that, I guess.
Right. So, looking back at your research on colonial suffrage, do
Yeah.
you see echoes of those patterns in contemporary voter behavior?
If I go through my colonial, I researched about the what happened during the freedom movement. I see a very interesting facts regarding Congress history, Indian National Congress, because you see, the most interesting part is that the on 28th of December 1885, when Congress was founded, and from the very beginning, membership was open for women. So women can be a member of Congress party. There was no barrier since beginning. So it was very interesting, though women were not there in 1885, but within 4 years, you see the Bombay Convention in 1889, 10 women initiated by the Ramabai participated in Congress convention, and no one got the chance to vote or vote on resolution, or no one chance get to speak also. But in 1890, one woman get the chance to speak as a vote of thanks. So I see our freedom movement saw the participation of women since beginning, though it was
Mhm.
not a large number, but still it was there. And I see when Gandhi entered in the freedom movement, the scenario changed regarding the participation of women. We can see, during the non cooperation movement, when the large number of women participated, and the main impact of that was the 1925, when Sarojini Naidu became the first Indian women president of national president of Congress Party. Why it is important for me? Not only because the a woman became the national president, it is because, you see, it was the time when the Western world, who claimed to
Mhm.
be more progressive than us, and they basically ruled on us on the on that claim, on the base of that claim, that they are more progressive, more democratic, and they are here to teach us, because we are
Mhm.
uncivilized people, so they want to civilize us. Okay, so
Mhm.
we will talk about 1925, when India was then India, all were we all were in same geographical country. That time, 1925, if we look towards the UK and America,
Mhm.
so-called democratic country, and we look upon the parties who claim to be more progressive, like Labour Party and
Mhm.
Democrats in America, in 1925, women were not having the right to become a leader in that party, in this party, and we were having a national president in our political party. So I guess we have a sound foundation, and I won't say that it's just because of male leaders. I
Mhm.
think that there was women who were continuously fighting for that equality, and I think the men, basically those who are leading that particular of time, they were having some kind of liberal approach, like Gandhi, Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, any others who were leading in that particular political party, that they basically were supported that thought. So
Mhm.
it was initiated by the women. I guess those foundation basically works for the women, but still I see there was a huge gap after 1947 till Rajiv Gandhi came. See, 1935 we were having women reservation
Mhm.
in 1935 Act. In 1937, we were having a large number of women in legislative assemblies
Mhm.
because of the reservation. But in 1950, when Constitution passed, we lost that reservation.
Mhm.
The interesting part is that you can find three kind of voices during Constitution debate. There were women who were opposing a reservation for women, because they were their assumption was that we got all kind of legal rights. So women will come the women will come in the process of the democracy. So but that assumption failed in future, and there was women who said, if we will give the reservation to women, for example, I'm asking ticket from seat A, but seat B got reserved. In seat B, any man could manage the ticket for women from
Mhm.
his family. But in that position, from seat A, I will not get the ticket, because they will say we already given the ticket from the seat B. So
Mhm.
seat A should go to some male candidate. So in that case, the seat A candidate will be suffered because of that particular reservation. So we should not have the such kind of reservation. There were women who were not directly asking for reservation, but they were asking indirectly for reservation, like when Dr. Ambedkar, he basically asked that those seats who were basically Dalits were elected on those, and those seats were get got vacant. Now those seats will be fulfilled by Dalits only. It's kind of reservation. So these women were asking that those seats which were vacated by the women, those seats should be fulfilled again, filled by the women only. So some kind of reservation they were asking, but they didn't ask for the reservation for the women. They couldn't. I don't think why they didn't have that courage to ask reservation for the women. But you see, Nehru recognized that condition, that women are not getting what they should get. During that time, he wrote a letter to his chief ministers that they should identify the women who can be the part of parliament. And next, he also speak about it during the Constitution Assembly, that the women didn't get what they deserve. So my question was that why he didn't initiated any kind of legal solution for that. So I guess I found two assumptions in that. One, he may also having that assumption that we already given the legal rights to women, then they will gradually they will come forward in the politics to using those legal rights. And second one is, you remember there was a Hindu code bill by Dr. Ambedkar,
Mhm.
and Dr. Ambedkar, that's a fantastic bill which gives us the all rights. We are enjoying the whole rights because of that. So all women should be grateful to Dr. Ambedkar, who drafted such kind of bill for us, and he was eager to pass it one go. And we all know the history himself, a testimony for that, that Nehru, even Nehru, he was a big leader of Congress, and we believe that he was able to do any kind of thing, but he was not able to pass it in one go. He had to break it and pass it in piece by piece. And because of that, Ambedkar has to resign also. He resigned in opposition to oppose that it's not going to pass in one go. So I think Nehru realized that the society who is not ready to give women social and economical rights, those people, he must thinking that won't be agree to give them the political rights. So that could be a reason. So he didn't try for any legal solution for that, so women can be the part of decision making in the political, equal part of decision making in the politics, or equal representation could have been in parliament and assemblies. So I found a long gap till Rajiv Gandhi didn't raise his voice regarding the 33% reservation. Initially, he was asking for even parliament and assembly, but later on, he also faced an opposition, and then he said, first we will try in local bodies, and then we will try afterwards. But you see, we got the reservation in local bodies when in 1993. And I guess 1.5 million women hold position in local bodies across the India since then. And in 2019 Lok Sabha, women made up 14.4%.
Right.
Okay, but in 2024 we saw a decline. It's only 13.6%. So we can't say that we had a strong foundation, but we couldn't build a strong building on it.
Okay. So, what I will tell our audience is, since we are talking about history, that India's independence movement was powered not only by its iconic male leaders, but also by extraordinary women whose courage shook the British Empire. Among the earliest was Rani Velu Nachiyar, the first Indian queen to wage armed resistance against the East India Company long before 1857. We remember Rani Lakshmi Bai, the warrior queen of Jhansi, who led her troops in the 1857 revolt and became a symbol of defiance. Begum Hazrat Mahal led resistance in Awadh during the same uprising. In the 20th century, leaders like Sarojini Naidu, known as the Nightingale of India, and Aruna Ashraf Ali, who famously hoisted the Indian flag during the Quit India movement, inspired nationwide civil resistance. These women, fighters, strategists, reformers, helped shape India's path to freedom. Eastern Bengal, historic Bengal presidency, was home to fierce women freedom fighters as well, who stood fearlessly against British colonial rule. One of the most remarkable was Pritilota Waddedar, a revolutionary who led the 1930 attack on the Pahartuli European club in Chittagong and chose death over arrest, becoming an icon of anti colonial resistance. We also remember Matongini Hazra, affectionately called Gandhiburi, who was shot dead while leading a Quit India procession, the tricolor held high in her hands. From underground networks to mass mobilization, Bengal's women fought with incredible determination, showing that resistance against the British was as much led by women as by men. That leads us to the next question, which is women's turnout surpassed men's in 2019 and again in 2024, even though you said that the numbers declined in 2024. So, uh, what does that signal? Greater autonomy, better mobilization, or something else?
See, I say women are now educated in terms of earlier, so they are voting. But still, I say they are not individual voters. They are still a silent voters. Many things affect or influence their voting pattern. Not only the decline in numbers in parliament, you see in current union cabinet minister, only seven women are there. Okay, and if we'll look at the state level, Nagaland elected its first women MLA in 2023.
Mhm.
Okay, just 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and it was decades after its formation of a state, because Nagaland was formed in 1963. Got statehood in 1963. 2023 got the first MLA. Mizoram too elected more than one women MLA for the first time in 2023 again. And it had only four women got elected since 72. So you see, in state level, if you go to the towards ministry, there are very few women who got finance ministry or the home ministry. They usually get the child and women care ministry, not other than that. If we go towards the president, only two women the president. If we go towards the chief minister, only 18 women are chief minister. But 18 numbers looks high, but you see, if we similarly see the India against backdrop of 28 states and 8 union territories and hundreds of male CMs since 1947, 18 is a very small number. And you see, there are only 12 states and one union territory who ever had a women's serves as a chief minister. So
Mhm.
heavy turnout of women voter doesn't mean that they are having the decision making participation in governance or decision making bodies. So
Mhm.
there is a gap between that. Result is showing the different picture and the voting pattern showing a different picture.
Right. So now I will ask you that in your research, you have shown that particularly two amendments, like 73rd Amendment and 74th Amendment of the Indian Constitution, has affected women's participation in the political scenario of India. First of all, please, if you kindly explain what is this 73rd and 74th Amendment of the Constitution and how it has created a pipeline for agency at higher levels.
Okay. 23rd constitutional amendment, basically, which was passed in April 24, 1993, which introduced very first time one-third reservation for women in Panchayati Raj, uh, Panchayati Raj institution and urban local bodies like municipal corporation or municipal bodies. And this was basically marking a transformative intervention in Indian democracy, because earlier women were not having any kind of participation in local bodies. There was a local election, but women were not having numbers in there, in terms of, as we are 50% of the society, but we were not getting position in local bodies in general election. So this reservation basically empowered us to get the chance in local bodies, and now we are having 50% reservation in local bodies in many states. We can say we are equally empowered in there.
At
In
least in
earlier
local politics, in the local politics,
is
your
in
part,
local bodies.
I mean, increased.
Yeah, yeah, they are getting tickets because parties are bound to give the tickets to women because of the reservation.
Why
If
do
they,
you think
they
that
should,
this is?
if they would have choice till today, the women will not get.
But why do you think that this is important from the gender perspective?
Yeah, you see, when you see, we got all equal rights in terms of legal position. We have the very good legal bills to empower us, but it was not empowering us. There was a gap in results. So you need some kind of reform, affirmative reforms to basically convert into the result. So this 33% reservation was actually a affirmative reform, because earlier we were not considered as a uh, strong candidate. We are still a weak candidate. That's
Mhm.
why we are not getting tickets equally in legislative assembly and the uh, parliament constituted elections. We are not getting the equal numbers of tickets. Even UP, we know Congress did a campaign, Ladki Hu Lad Sakti Hu, and 40% reservation for women, because we were not having the candidates also there. The party is in weaker position. So party use it to give the chance to the women. And that, I think that was a great effort, obviously. But when we are in strong position, are we giving the same chance to women? It's not about the Congress. It's all about the political scenario.
It's
So if
everywhere,
you, yeah, so
even
in
in
one of
the.
my article, actually, I divided women in four categories who are in politics. The first one, which we found in large number, like who has a political background. Okay, father, mother, mother, I can't say father, brothers, a husband, anyone who is in politics, and that girls came into the politics, and it's a large number, but many of them, they proved themselves. Like, I will start from the Indira Gandhi. Okay, Pandit Nehru was his father. It was a great you can say privilege for her, but now Indiraji is not known as a, not known because of Pandit Nehru. Indiraji known for her work.
Mhm.
She proved
Right.
herself. Like, if I'll go to state level, like Sheila Dikshit,
Mhm.
she came from a political family, but now no one remember her political background. Everyone remembers the Sheila Dikshit only. She proved herself. Even Sonia Gandhi, she proved herself. So they came because of the political family, but they proved themselves. This is the one category. Second one, who don't have any kind of political family, but they still have a political godfather, male political godfather,
Mhm.
like UP Mayawati. Without Kashiram, you
Mhm.
can't imagine Mayawati. Like
Okay.
Jayalalitha, okay.
Mhm.
And there is a third category, the girls who came through, women who came through organizational politics, and step by step they basically made their position.
Mhm.
Like Sushma Swaraj, okay, like in Congress you can say Ambika Soni, she was the National Youth Congress president, like Uma Bharti. They all came through organization. The fourth one, and that is very interesting, the women who doesn't have any kind of political background, who doesn't have any kind of male godfather, and who doesn't even have any organizational support, who
Interesting.
created everything, her empire, uh, by herself.
Mhm.
And the only person I can found in India, that was the Mamta Banerjee.
Okay.
Yeah, she was from Congress party. Obviously, she had an organizational background, but her organization basically didn't support her, and she was expelled from the Congress. And she created her own organization. She doesn't have any kind of political background. She doesn't have any kind of political male godfather, and she proved herself.
Right.
So I
So, mhm,
So I divided into four parts. And you see, when you were talking about the women who were in history, who participate, we shouldn't forget the women like Durga Bora, who was associated with Bhagat Singh, even Shushila Didi, who was also again associated with Bhagat Singh. They were part of revolutionary movement, being a woman.
mhm, true.
That was again a challenging part. And then we should not forget about the Rani Jhansi regiment women who
Mhm,
fought in Indian Subhash Chandra Bose army. So INA basically. And then we should not forget one interesting woman I would like to mention, Suchitra Kripalani. I don't know you know about her or not, but Suchitra Kripalani and her husband, Mr. Kripalani, both were in Congress party during the freedom movement. And after independence, Mr. Kriplani had a huge ideological differences with Pandit Nehru. So he left the Congress party and he founded his own political party. He fought against election against the Congress party. He basically filled the candidates against the Congress candidates. What Suchitra Kriplani did that was far beyond her time. She decided to remain in Congress, and she was
okay,
living with
that's very
his husband, her husband. She didn't break up with her husband. She was living under the same roof, but having a different identity, political identity, and she decided to remain with Congress, and she became the first women president of Uttar Pradesh.
right.
So we
Right.
have such kind of stories also.
Yeah, we have reached to the very end. So there is a like a rapid fire round. I'll ask you that
Okay.
beyond reservation, which reforms would most effectively increase women's representation? Like in bullet points.
Yeah, one. You need an environment. Gandhi created the uh, such kind of actions or oriented program which basically women felt comfortable within it, and we need that environment first of all. Second, we need to give equal opportunity to women without having any kind of prejudice. So here I would like to share one example, if you the times allow. In 2005, there was a DUSU election. So there
Mhm.
were two women candidates who were asking for ticket. One was Ragini Nayak, second was Amrita Dhawan. And at that time, Mr. Ashok Gehlot was in charge of NSUI, National Student Union of India. And he asked me my opinion, and I said the Ragini, we should give the presidential candidate as a Ragini, and we should give the vice presidential candidate to the Amrita Dhawan. In that case, we will have two strong candidate in panel, and Amrita has one more year. So next year for presidential candidate, we no need to look for someone else. So we will have presidential candidate for next year also. So he replied to me, but people are saying having two women candidate in the same panel, it will weaken the panel. So I said, if we will have all four men, is it surety that they all will win? So I don't know, that happened. Maybe more people said the same thing, and it happened, and the whole panel won. All four candidates won that time, and I don't see that was repeated again. That two women candidate in a panel in any political party in DUSU election even. So I think women, if women, they got chance and they proved. So we need the opportunity without any kind of ideological bias.
So you talked about some new metrics. So is there any other new metrics should we track to measure agency beyond turnout? That would be my last question.
Okay, yeah. Like if it take metrics consideration, I think ticket allocation. One thing,
Mhm.
how many tickets we are giving to the women,
Mhm.
and second,
You mean
institutional positions.
you mean tickets for election so that they can
Yeah,
contest,
election
right?
contests to contest
Yeah.
the elections. Like how many tickets have been given to the women, every political party you can say. And second one, not only tickets, institutional positions and role.
Hmm.
So if I'll see, Indian Youth Congress only had one women president, that was the Ambika Soni. No one became afterwards. Even if we see it
Hmm.
never had women president, national president. They claim to they are empowering women, but they are not produce a single women national president of BJP since its foundation. So
Yeah,
role in,
there has to be a women first policy
yeah, you
that you
should
are
give
seeing.
the chance at least. At least you
Right.
should give the chance to lead. So and policy influence could be a thing. Examine whether women legislature introduce bill or raise questions, lead debates, and save budgets, especially on issue beyond women or welfare profile. Autonomy in decision making.
Hmm.
This could be the metrics,
New
new
metrics
metrics. Yeah.
that should be introduced. So actually, that brings us to the end of today's conversation. We have explored the evolution from the silent voter to the political agent, the drivers behind rising female turnout, and the structural barriers that still hold women back from full representation. As Dr. Unial reminded us, turnout is only one piece of the puzzle. True agency requires dismantling systematic hurdles and rethinking how parties engage women beyond tokenism. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to the SADF podcast and share it with your network. For more insights on South Asia's political and social dynamics, visit sadf.eu. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Dr. Unial, for sharing your expertise. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.
Thank you.